Hey, Dr. C here. Nice to be back in the studio again, and really nice to have you. I'm going to talk today about the COVID vaccines. Now, I know that that's all you read about is COVID now, COVID this, COVID that, but nobody really goes into great detail about the individual vaccines. You know the companies, but you don't really know what these vaccines are made of. What are the side effects from them? Things like that. You need to know these things. So I thought we'd have a program on just the COVID vaccines themselves. As yet, I haven't gotten mine, but now it seems like I'm going to be in the first tier of the phase 2. And so very shortly, I hope, my wife and I will be getting ours. At any rate, just to begin, I'm going to try to do some basic vaccine stuff first so you will understand about the COVID vaccines a little better, okay? So let's do that. When you say you're going to get a vaccination, is that the same as an immunization? No, the vaccination is basically just giving you the disease antigen, and it could be anything, but that disease, an antigen for that disease, put into your body, but it can't replicate. It can't cause the disease. Whereas immunization, that takes into effect now with the immune response in your body to that antigen. So a little different. Okay, what types of vaccines are out there? Well, when I first started out, we had basic number of vaccines. And I think I've told you in the past that I got even when I was in grammar school, we had the old diphtheria shots where there was just one needle that the doctor came in with, and he had a Bunsen burner, and he heated it up in between, and bang, you got your shot. Heated it up in the Bunsen burner, bang, you got your shot. That hurt like hell. It really did. But that was way back with the old diphtheria shots. Subsequently, we had the polio vaccine. And now, as time progressed and as technology improved, there are now 4 different categories of vaccines that are out there. First, there's a whole virus. And remember, viruses cannot replicate themselves. They only replicate when they get into one of a host's cells. So a virus doesn't even have a cell wall, it just has an envelope. Nevertheless, the whole virus unit. Now, there are 2 types of whole virus vaccines. First, there's the, the live attenuated. What they do is they'll take that virus and they will put it into something like formalin, whatever, and they will inactivate the part that causes the disease. But it can still replicate. That's the key. It can still replicate, but it can't cause the disease. So that's the live attenuated virus. Live attenuated. Examples of that would be the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, varicella, chickenpox. Those are all examples of the live attenuated virus. It has to be frozen most of the time. The other type of whole virus are the inactivated vaccines. And examples of that where you actually kill the virus, kill it completely. And so inactivated, the genetic material now is destroyed, and so it cannot replicate any longer. So they have to rely on the proteins in the shell of that virus then to be the antigen that will bring on an antibody response. So that's the first type, the whole virus type. Then there is a protein subunit type. Now the protein subunit is usually the capsule of the virus that has proteins on it. As you know, and you've seen the pictures thousands of times now of that coronavirus with the little spikes going up. So in terms of the coronavirus, they use the proteins on that spike. Now, what is the value of that spike? Well, the spike itself is actually how that virus gets into your cell in the body. That spike connects to a receptor that's in the respiratory tree. There's also receptors in the GI tract, but in the respiratory tree. And there's more in the upper respiratory tract than there is in the lower respiratory tract. And so that spike protein now will attach then to that receptor, and then the virus can enter the cell. That's why they now are just doing the nasal, because the nasal and the nasopharynx, that's the upper airway, and that has more of the receptors, and therefore more chances you'd have a good positive test. So that's a protein subunit using just a fragment as the protein antigen. So, but you're not going to get the disease from it. You cannot get the disease. It's just a protein fragment, usually from the envelope of the virus. Before we had the modern technology, we began to see what they call recombinant recombinant vaccines. For example, hepatitis B, that's a recombinant vaccine. Nowadays, we have more modern recombinant vaccines. So number 2, protein subunit. Number 3, nucleic acid vaccines. That uses the genetic material to provide instructions to make the antigen. Examples of that, usually the genetic material that is used to make it is what's called mRNA. Again, let me give you a little bit of virology. The DNA in our bodies, which is in every cell, the DNA, it's a double chain. It is a blueprint. The purpose of the blueprint is because our bodies are turning over cells all the time. And in order to make the protein, which is part of the cell wall and part of the cell, they have to then use the RNA to clamp on to that section of the DNA that has that protein as an ultimate result, claps on, and then becomes messenger RNA, mRNA. That messenger RNA goes to what they call a ribosome. The ribosomes get together and they form a protein. So that's basic biology now that I think you need to know a little bit about it. And so the problem with nucleic acid type of vaccines, which are the 2 major vaccines now that are out on the market in the United States, the mRNA vaccines, is they have to be ultra cold. So that is a big deal with one of the 2 vaccines, and I'll explain as we go into that. The 4th type is a viral vector. Now, I explained to you a little bit how the mRNA gets in. I explained to you how the virus gets into the cells, the normal route for that virus, the coronavirus, to get in. So how else can they get in? They use a viral vector. For example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, for example, uses an adenovirus. That is a whole category of virus that's out there. But that virus is a very benign virus. It won't cause any problems at all. But it has the ability to get into your cells in the body. And so what they do now is they'll put the DNA of the coronavirus within that adenovirus, and then that adenovirus gets into the cell, and then you can go ahead and make antibodies to that. So that is the Johnson & Johnson type. And incidentally, it's also the type that's used in Russia for their vaccine, the Sputnik 5 vaccine. They used two adenoviruses, actually, because they make other batches as well. So they use two different types of adenovirus to get the antigen into your cell. Okay, those are the four major categories of the vaccines. Now let's talk a little bit about the COVID vaccines. Well, we already mentioned the two that are on the market in the United States. And the two that are on the market come from Pfizer and Mrna. So we all read plenty, so we all know that those two are available. Roughly of the 200 and so different types of vaccines that are out there, but not yet approved by the United States, about 8 of them are approved in other countries. So even the Johnson & Johnson is approved in England, for example, but not here yet, not here yet. And so first let's talk then about the mRNA viruses. How do they get into the cell? Well, the mRNA encapsulates. It encapsulates the using what they call a lipid nanoparticle. You don't have to know what the heck that all is, but it's a fatty type of particle at any rate. And it encapsulates, forms an enteroseal, they call it, but it encapsulates. That capsule then is able to get into a cell. Now within that capsule is the antigen. The antigen is from that spike protein. Now it can be any of the antigens, because there's a bunch of different antigens on the spike protein, but that seems to be the way to go. Use that spike protein. So that's within this capsule. And that capsule then is recognized by our immune system. Once that is in the cell, it gets out. That spike protein now is the antigen. That cell recognizes it, breaks it up. Spike protein goes to the surface, and as soon as it hits the surface, the immune cells then are attracted to that spike protein. And what they do then is they begin to produce B cells and T cells. They all come in. These are lymphocytes, B cells and T cells. The B cells that come will react with that antigen, and they'll begin to produce immunoglobulins. This is in the serum of your blood, immunoglobulins. This is what they measure with the antibody testing. They measure the immunoglobulins. And so that begins fairly soon, right away. But also you need to have something for the future. You need to know, will there be some memory? How will your body recognize this in the future? That's where the T cells come in. So the T cells will use a little, what they call helper T cell, which creates the killer T cell, which will destroy any cell that has that antigen in it. Okay, that's how the mRNA virus works. Now, the reason it came on the market fast with this nonsense that they tell you, but it comes fast because it can be produced fast. With the technology they have, all they need to do is to get all the elements of the DNA of the virus. That's it. That's all they need. And we had the coronavirus sequence way back in January of 2020. The Chinese produced that. They showed us the sequence, but we can produce it too. And so given that sequence now, you can then identify those particular proteins and make your vaccine from those particular antigens. Okay, so that's number one. The two mRNAs, first of all, the Pfizer and the Moderna. The second type are called protein subunits, just like we've mentioned before. That's one of the ones, protein subunits. And generally, the subunit is either an element of the spike protein or possibly off the envelope. Could be what they call either the N, the nuclear part, or the envelope protein itself. One or the other. Sometimes both. And so all the vaccines that are out there, those 200 or so that are trying to be manufactured and all, they use one or the other type of antigen protein, so subprotein unit. Now the vector viral, how does that get in? Well, the vector viral used by Johnson & Johnson, that's the one that's probably going to be the next one that'll be approved in the United States. That one there uses, as I had mentioned, an adenovirus. They call it adenovirus 26. Got loads of different adenoviruses out there, but adenovirus 26. That helps it to get into the cell. And so what happens then is that particular adenovirus gets into the cell and discharges its material into the area of the nucleus. The nucleus then will push that DNA and release those spike proteins that are in that encapsulated area. Again, once the encapsulation occurs, you get the mRNA, and from that point, it's just like the mRNA vaccine. So you get then the whole immune response from the B cells and from the T and the T cells as well. Okay, so those are the types. Now there are other types that are out there. For example, say the AstraZeneca, that uses an adenovirus as well. That one, maybe within the spring, we may see that being approved as well. Another one that could be close is the SmithKline and Sanofi. There, they use a protein subunit, the Sanofi SmithKline type. Okay, let's talk a little bit about especially the two that are out on the market now, because those are the more likely ones that will be offered to you in the near future. First of all, the Pfizer. The Pfizer one, you need 2 doses, 21 days apart. You can give it to anyone age 16 and up. However, you do have to store it at a very cold temperature, at least minus 70 centigrade, which is minus 94 Fahrenheit. At least a minus 70, so it has to be shipped on dry ice to keep this thing as cold as possible. Once it thaws, you have a very limited time to use it. If you get the 2 vaccines, let's say you get 1 vaccine, it's not useless. You get about 50 to 52% efficiency out of that, so it's not useless. But it's not 94% like it can be if you get the second dose. So after 21 days, you should get that second dose. So again, there's a lot of limitations, the temperature, the transportation, and once it's thawed, you have a very limited time now to give that vaccine. Then there's the Moderna. Now this Moderna also requires 2 doses. The 2 doses are roughly about 28 days apart, as opposed to the Pfizer vaccine. They can be given age 18 up. And you can store it at just minus 20 degrees centigrade, which is minus 4 Fahrenheit. Very easy to store. And you can store it for up to, I believe, up to 6 months. Once you take it out of the freezer, though, and put it into the refrigerator, you only have about 12 hours to give that dosage once it is out of that refrigerator, 12 hours. So, very good. Those are the two that are out there. What are the other things about the Johnson & Johnson? That's a single dose. Johnson & Johnson is a single dose. Again, that can be stored at a very reasonable temperature, minus 20 degrees centigrade, and that can be stored up to 2 years. So a lot of things about that Johnson & Johnson are they look very good. And apparently the Johnson & Johnson generates a very good response, a little more in the elderly than in the younger. So keep that in mind if that comes on. It's a single dose, single dose. So let's talk for a moment about side effects. Well, you have to know, first of all of the side effects of these vaccines. And what are the components of the vaccine that could cause a side effect? Well, we know, at least from the Mrna vaccines, that of the several million that have been given so far, there have been roughly 10 what they really call anaphylactic reactions. People who had severe reaction had to be hospitalized and given epinephrine by drip, and they made it through. Nobody died. Nobody died. 9 out of the 10 people who had that had a history of severe allergies. Could be to anything, but they had a history of severe allergies. Also, there were over 100 people who had significant but not anaphylactic type allergic reactions to the drug, to the vaccine. Now you figure out of 4 million people, that's not bad, 100. It's not that bad. And most of these were a sore arm for a day. That was the most common. That varied. The very first dose is just a small number, 2.7%. And then after the second dose, 4.8% of people had soreness, significant soreness in the arm. Almost 10% had fatigue, 10%. But that lasted only for 24 to 36 hours. 4.5% had a headache. And some had significant muscle aches or joint pains. Almost 9% had muscle or joint pains. Many had a very low-grade fever. Some complained of brain fog. Now, I didn't really grasp what the heck is brain fog, but you're kind of floating. You're aware of everything, you do things, but you're in a little fog. That lasts usually for a day. Okay, those are the side effects of the Mrna. We didn't hear a lot about the side effects from the Pfizer vaccine as yet. Okay. What are the components? What else is in the vaccine? Well, in the Pfizer vaccine, there's polyethylene glycol. That is probably the most common agent that can cause an allergic reaction in the Pfizer vaccine. In the Mrna vaccine, there are a couple. There's methoxy polyethylene glycol, which is the most common one that could cause a problem, and tromethamine. So those are the two that can possibly cause an allergic reaction in there. Okay. Let's go on. There are some things that we're learning still. We're learning all the time from these vaccines. If you get your vaccine, can you still catch COVID? The answer is yes. What we don't know is that if you do catch COVID, apart from the vaccine, you're not getting it from the vaccine, but if you get it, can you still transmit it to others? Probably in the next month or so, we'll have an answer to that. But right now we don't. So, once you get your vaccine, still wear your mask. Wash your hands regularly. If you're sick, stay home. Keep your distance. All these things are very important because, again, we have unanswered questions on whether you could still be contagious in the future. The other question is, how long does it last? Well, we know that you do affect both sides of the immune system. First, the humoral side, that is the immunoglobulins, which are the immediate thing. And you do get the B cells, which produce it, and the T cells, which kill it. Now, how long are those T cells still floating around and available? Well, there's a thing called a memory T cell. These may not be seen readily, but if you get exposed to the virus, all of a sudden, your body will react by producing a whole bunch of these memory T cells to identify the antigen and to try to neutralize it. So we know that the Mrna vaccine lasts at least 6 to 8 months. At least that. Could be much longer, but we don't know yet. We don't know. And we also don't give it to children. Remember, one is 16, one is age 18. So we don't know yet if it's effective with children. Now, lately we've been hearing about variants. These viruses mutate all the time. They millions of times they'll mutate. Very few of them are significant mutants. The one we hear about a lot is the one from Great Britain. And fortunately, the Mrna vaccine is effective against the Great Britain one. However, it's not as effective against the mutant from South Africa or from Brazil. Now, Los Angeles thinks they have a mutant as well, but we don't know that much about that particular one. So Mrna is now in the process of making a booster vaccine to cover the major mutant from South Africa and possibly in the future from Brazil. So it's something to think about, and obviously there's more information that will be coming out in the very near future about those issues. Okay, my last thought, get your vaccine. There is absolutely no reason in the world for you to not get the COVID vaccine. Don't listen to anything else, get it. And regardless of which type you get, if you are available to get it, get the vaccine. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is Dr. C. Have a good day.